All right. Welcome everyone to this week's Full Stack Forum. I'm Michael, and you all kind of know me, so that's more for the benefit of the people watching afterwards. Today we're going to be talking about reliability under pressure. And what I mean by that, honestly, is when we look at the environments that we work in, it's sometimes really hard to tell what is actually going on, especially when things are getting intense or urgent or there's critical problems going on. And um, the, in my opinion, a full stack developer, and this includes, I say full stack developer. When I say full stack developer, I'm really talking about any IT professional, anybody who works in the tech world and sees this all firsthand. They all have the potential to be full stack. We typically, in the software world, define full stack as, hey, I can write front end and back end. And that is pretty terribly naive. There's a whole lot more. And we all see it in the work that we do. When we work with people, we wonder what the difference is between somebody who's like really senior and somebody who's not, and what leadership's actual choices are in how we make new leaders, how new leaders come about. So one of these topics I like to talk about is reliability under pressure. And it's more about being aware of these topics, being aware of things that maybe we weren't aware of before, right? We're looking for observable patterns. We're not looking for self-judgment. We're not looking for hero stories, but quite honestly, it feels good sometimes to tell a little bit of a hero story, especially when we're the hero. And I think that a lot of work environments today, especially with AI showing how some of what the business wants can really be accelerated. These environments have and continue to reward urgency, even when it makes reliability worse. So what I typically do as the group grows, what I want to do is I want to go out into breakup rooms. But with us here now, I think it's more important that we can treat this as our breakout room. So the first thing I want to bring up is a question. And I want you guys to kind of think about it a little bit and give me your opinion based upon your experience or your thoughts, what you've seen before in yourself or in others. So when the pressure rises in your work environment, when things, for lack of a better description, when the crap hits the fan, okay, what boundary of your own, your personal boundary, usually collapses first? And I'll give you some examples. We have boundaries like facts versus guesses, urgency and panic, scope or commitment, capacity and quality, speed and safety, code done versus outcome verified. These are just some examples in more of a versus scenario. But when the pressure starts to rise on you, what boundary for yourself do you feel collapsing first?
I'll take a shot at that. For me, I think it
Sure.
was speed, actually, because my first position was QA, so I do not let the quality slip because, it was just sort of like beaten into me a little bit. You're the QA, we're not having the QA mess anything up. I'm like, okay, you got it. So I think it would be really some of the velocity. Like I would prioritize well, I would be shrinking my scope immediately to the things that I can either personally verify that are the most important or the ones that seem to be the most urgent and important, which again is a judgment call. Sometimes you don't make those perfectly because you don't have the full information given to you. But for me, that was the one that went first. It would be the sort of the scope or the speed of, because I'll get the first two things that are important, but not the rest of them.
Right.
I'll get those right first.
How does that follow-up question for you specifically, Brandon? How does that collapse land with your leadership? Let me maybe ask a more detailed question. Do you communicate that those are going to slip when that pressure rises, or is it just okay? So it is a communication, and then how does that communication usually land?
I've had mixed results with it. Sometimes it landed very well. I think sometimes, to be honest, some days you communicate something better. Sometimes you are a bit rushed, so the communication is also a bit more rushed, so they might not get the full scope of the information you're trying to give. So I've had it land very good a few times and not so good a few other times. I think, there's of course the human factor of how bad of a day are they having. If it is very urgent, I'm trying to make sure we get to the root of the problem right away. So if we had an urgent outage, for example, they're not going to care about the other issues, which I'm cutting in scope, like the next test cases. They're worried about how do we get production back up right now. And I'm like, okay, dev team, here's what I have. That was sort of my part. But on the other end, we have had it to where there was a massive bill, for example, on one of our cloud providers. We saved the company close to 20 grand a month, which was insanely good, I thought, but they were very unhappy because there was something that did not seem that important that they were wanting yesterday, which was not effectively communicated with us. So that was sort of a sudden, comparatively, it was a sudden issue that we did not realize was even an issue to begin with. So again, communication there. But that was something that slipped because we had a more pressing matter that was brought to our attention of, hey, this thing is way over budget.
Good. I want to. That's an amazingly detailed example of. I would argue a boundary collapse that you see coming, right?
Yeah.
And that you're able to communicate, but even when you are able to communicate it, that you point out an example of other things that occur where communication still gets lost, right? So it's not even a matter of, hey, it's not even necessarily a matter of this thing is happening. We're doing a good thing. It's more a matter of the business is not necessarily communicating something, and that by not communicating that, the business has created their own sense of urgency, right? So who owns that urgency, right?
That was actually a very good question to ask. Who owned the urgency was another important thing that we had to figure out, because that was from two different people at the same time, roughly. So that's another sense of urgency, and a bit of coordination between the branches was a bit more difficult there. Whereas the other one, I feel, was more cut and dry. Of I had to cut other things because production's down, of course,
right?
Which seems to be getting less and less. Hopefully, that will be much less in the future. But I think as we have the urgency of certain tasks, things like that do slip through more because of things getting cut over time.
Okay. DJ, Tabitha, any thoughts or examples from y'all side?
For me, I think the things that kind of collapse first is like, I feel like I can default to panic. And I sometimes forget to take a beat and assess the actual urgency of the matter, because I think I typically will interpret anything. Well, I don't want to say anything as like an emergency. Like, if someone just messages me about something, like that's obviously not an emergency, but like any sort of, like when we talk about the pressure rising, we're seeing errors coming, stuff is failing. Especially if it's related to something that I have recently touched, or I just deployed something. Like, I think the panic can very quickly rise, and then my alarms are going off. And so I'm internalizing a lot of this as like, whether it's my fault or not, just like, I need to get this fixed ASAP, which in general, like, yes, we want to make sure production is working and everything, but like, how many people is this affecting? Is it affecting one or two, or is it like platform wide, sort of things? So a lot of times, like, I will panic and all that thinking kind of goes out the window. And so I'm interpreting everything as like a critical resolve now, urgency, when in reality, take a breath, assess, like, is this actually, what is this person communicating to me, assessing scope, that sort of stuff, scope of impact. So I'd say, yeah, definitely maybe the facts versus opinions and like panic is sort of where my first things break down, I'd say.
Yeah, I identify a lot with what you were saying there because I, like, even in my book I have an example of where I've had many situations before where the messages come in because of the person that those messages are coming from. I'm allowing some, the best word for it is panic. I'm allowing some concern over my own reputation, essentially, to color how I'm responding. And it's actually not even a response. It's basically invoking a reaction, right? And
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
I react to things rather than responding, which is where you get the facts versus opinions and the evidence, right? When you can respond to something, you can collect evidence, because even under pressure, you know that reliability means, am I truly assessing the impact of this? Am I looking over what is actually being presented and making fact and evidence-based decisions, versus a reaction where it's like, hey, I got this feeling, this is where it is, right? And when we're under pressure, that's exactly what we're doing. We're going after the feelings. And I'm not saying it doesn't work. Like, cannot tell you how many times me going, I bet dimes to dollars the problem is exactly this, which I've seen before. I've been right, and yet I'm still the one who's reacting to something and taking a risk in that. So that's a really great example. Tabitha, thoughts?
I think for me, the first boundary to break down would be capacity, just because I am kind of in the QA sense of like, I don't want to put out any work with mistakes. So I'm still going to work in the same speed that I have been, because I've learned the hard way that working faster will result in more mistakes. So working at the same speed is going to require me to give more of my own personal time over time that's already dedicated to work. So I'll take then the extra capacity in order to make sure that it's done correctly, even if I'm super late doing it.
Right. Yeah, that's also super common. And in the time that you and I worked together, I don't think you would believe how many times I did literally the exact same thing, because of where the communication was coming from, right? Capacity. What does capacity sacrifice look like? When you sacrifice that boundary, what does that look like? That looks like I'm now sacrificing the work-life balance boundary that I have set for myself to meet the needs of the company in order for me to look more reliable, which which doesn't always, right, but can look like, yes, this person's very reliable. I can count on them to work extra hours whenever I need to. Uh-oh. Now we're in that unpaid work area. Now we're in that we're reliable, but we're sacrificing pay. We're sacrificing time, right? To do that. And what does that end up doing? It creates a culture that I don't think any of us want to work in, right? Just like when we sacrifice scope, it creates a culture that the business doesn't want to work in, because we all know the business does not want to sacrifice scope. They want everything, and they want it at speed, right? And many times this is completely unrealistic, right? It can be very, very unrealistic to do that. Sacrificing communication also. Every single one of these things we sacrifice ends up with some sort of detriment to the culture that we're trying to create, right? So why does this apply to being what I call a full stack developer? Okay. A full stack developer is looking at what they can control. And the one thing you can control is your boundaries. But what's difficult to control is the reaction of other people, especially those who have authority over you. Right? So when we sacrifice these things, and y'all can raise your hand if you want to as I talk through it, right? If you have something to interject, feel free to raise your hand at any time. If you have some response to a question I'm asking, feel free to raise your hand. I will absolutely stop and let you do it. When we sacrifice these things, right? When we sacrifice our need, the requirement that we have to get more certainty around an issue, right? We sacrifice that scope. We sacrifice communication or capacity. What to you is the result to our holistic view of ourselves as full stack people, right? That's the question I'm going to be driving at throughout the call, is to tie it back. When we talk about what full stack means, it means I'm not just looking at my technical skill sets. I'm not looking at the things I can learn or the things I can show that I've learned, right? It's not about how much SQL can I do. It's not just about how much code can I write and how quickly can I write it. The vast majority of our jobs is non-technical, whether we realize it or not. For as many years as I've been in software development, the perception has been that we gauge how good a developer is by how many lines of code they write. That's a prevailing, and still to this day, that's a prevailing perspective of people who don't necessarily understand. But at the same time, with that and all the flaws that are with that particular measurement, we get told the developers are really, really hard to work with and need to develop their soft skills. So when you ask people, hey, can you help me understand what you mean by soft skills, right? The answer is never specific enough. I've not run across a single person who has been able to articulate specific things that I can understand as an engineer to what they're looking for with those better soft skills. Improve your communication, do more presentation. Those are the kind of answers that I get, right? Let us know more. But then when I do, again, being on the spectrum and this being Autism Awareness Month, I'm going to tell you this. When I do that data dump from my brain of all the technical knowledge I have, the people who are not technical go, stop. Just stop. So it's not about communicating more. It's about what you are communicating and how you are communicating it. When these boundaries break down, in your experience, how do they help, or how does that breakdown hinder? I assume it's hinder. I mean, if you think it helps, tell me. But when these boundaries break down, how does it not just hinder the culture you're trying to exist in, but how does it hinder your own personal development? We look at personal development in our world as I'm getting a degree. I'm getting skills that match my job. I'm getting experience that matches my job. But how much of that experience are you not looking at? Maybe someone here knows of a situation they've run into where that boundary collapse has literally affected their desire to continue doing what they're doing. I know I've seen that for myself, right? Years ago, before I even started looking at this, one of the things I'll tell you all about is I fancied myself a software architect probably quite a few years before I was actually ready to be that, right? Big fan sometimes of the fake it till you make it mentality here, okay? The owner of the company that I worked for at the time could be a very intimidating individual. And when he would bring me stuff that he wanted to do, new features and stuff like that, and I would start digging into requirements, I could watch. It was a big joke in the office. I could watch his eyes glaze over. And we would almost place bets before that meeting of how many minutes into the meeting it would take for his eyes to glaze over. That's how much it was known, right? And when that happened, though, his reaction to it was to get visibly upset, to not want to deal with the details, because I mean he's got a lot going on, he's got a lot of business, right? But we needed answers to these questions, and we never really found the right solution that a lot of companies find, where they have somebody who is in the middle who translates. But these boundary breakdowns, they tend to affect our own and other people's perception of our reliability. So the path here being, you get pressure. Let's talk about urgency. Let's talk about that real quick. You get pressure in the form of urgency. Whether it's justified or not, somebody comes to you and says, I need this and I need it now. So you're under pressure now, right? When you don't hold your boundaries for across the board, when you don't hold your boundaries, right? Think of an example of where you think that might have, for you or for somebody else, affected your perception or their perception of your reliability. Did those things make you want to go, am I really cut out to do this? Right? What are some end results that you guys have experienced in your reliability to do your job underneath those pressure concerns? Can you name them?
I think for me, when I don't maintain, and this has happened, where if I don't maintain those boundaries, people see me as reliable and they continue to keep coming to me directly for things. Just like for bugs that they see, or, hey, like, can you look up this configuration for me or whatever? Usually it's like people like outside of technology. So it's people from the business coming, and asking me for these things. And, I try to be very, very accommodating and helpful and stuff. But like, if I don't maintain those boundaries, rather than having folks go through the proper intake process for these requests, whatever, they're just shortcutting that and coming to me. And then that eats into, my time that I need to dedicate to other actual things that I've been assigned. And sometimes these requests come in and they are, quote unquote urgent, to this person, but that urgency gets then put onto me rather than, going through the proper channels and like escalating it and having someone, having it get, assigned. And so if I'm not maintaining those boundaries, I'm just kind of allowing that to happen, allowing that urgency to get put on me. I start to internalize a lot of that and feel like, oh, this is my responsibility. So yeah, I think that's kind of like what happened or what has happened in the past. I've been trying to be much more cognizant of this and being aware of how much of my time is being eaten up by these sort of extracurricular requests. I'll call them. Always happy to be helpful and everything, but when it starts to eat into, and take away time for my actual main duties and things, that's where it starts to become a problem.
I completely agree with that. That's a real, I think that's a real like powerful example of it. We end up doing things like we end up starting to feel like, we have imposter syndrome. We end up questioning as an end result of this, as we take on responsibility that really wasn't ours to begin with, right? As as communication dwindles and other people's urgency, we start to own other people's urgency. We may look reliable, but we aren't actually reliable. We're only reliable in specific cases, right? So what I'm going to talk through now is, what does reliability under pressure actually mean? I think we've covered what naturally sort of happens, but what does it look like behavior-wise to exhibit real reliability under pressure? And I'm going to start with sort of this path, right? There's 3 moves. It's kind of like a chess. It's kind of like a set of chess moves, right? Move number 1, preserve your boundaries every single time, right? Today, because I have decided to commit, I set a fun boundary for myself. The full stack forum will always happen with me wearing an awesome shirt. So today's fit is "What Up Party People" with Louis, right? And so I'm going to use Bandit as an example, right? If anybody, and I realize I'm probably like, I'm an old man. I'm what they call a geriatric millennial. So I have a bunch of kids who love to watch Bluey, right? And not everyone gets it. But the show is awesome for everyone. And the dad, Bandit, often gives us great examples of preserving boundaries, right? There is a single episode where the youngest child, Bingo, wants to watch TV and he wants to go to the park. And so he works through with Bingo that thing, and they sit on the chair together. And she goes at the end of it all, like, I still want to watch TV. And Bandit goes, not a chance, gets up and walks out the door. Like, that's it, right? Preserving his boundary, no excuses, no justification necessary, right? So move 1, preserve your boundary, right? And I think that we bring awareness to those boundaries, right? It does require some thought from ourselves, right? What are my boundaries, right? If you have set a work-life balance boundary for yourself, right? Know it, preserve it, right? Turn off those Slack messages at 5 p.m. or whenever you say you're done, right? create a path for true urgency to get through to you. But people are going to be most people, as long as they're not one of my old bosses, most people are going to go, if it's a true emergency, I have to text this individual. And they're going to be a lot more hesitant to send the text than they are to send you a quick Slack message, right? Set your boundaries, preserve your boundaries, know what they are, okay? When you are responding to those things, right? The choice is yours. Even if you set your Slack to no notifications, if you end up checking your Slack at 9 o'clock at night and you see something comes through and you decide to respond to it, maybe you really like the person who messaged you, you decide to respond to it, right? Always communicate constraints, right? Hey, I need to know this, right? It's going to take me this long to do this, right? Look at those things that generally collapse, those boundaries that collapse, right? Don't own someone's sense of urgency for them, right? Is it urgent to you? Okay. That makes you invoke your own values, right? If your value is to provide a great experience for the customer, someone comes to you and says, there's this problem, right? And I want you to fix it right now, but it literally affects one customer, right? They're responsible for justifying that urgency, not you. Even when they have authority over you, right? I'm not saying be a jerk about it, right? But communicate your constraints, stick with the facts and evidence, right? And I always tend, especially in situations of urgency, one of the things I started doing that really helped my communication with somebody in authority over me was to get clarity. I worked with a group where everything was urgent. There was no definition at the time of the difference between critical, urgent, important, or otherwise. So I created it. When the most important person in that company messaged me for something, right? She didn't usually include whether it was urgent or not, right? So I would simply just ask one question. I would say, hey, I'm working on this right now, right? Is what you're asking me something that is urgent or is it important, right? Can I take time to respond to you, or do you need me to drop and go now, right? Seek that clarity. Communicate the constraints. Communicate. Don't collapse a boundary without your own agreement and communication. That's what communicating the constraint actually means. It doesn't mean we don't do the things, right? It doesn't mean we aren't helpful. It doesn't mean we aren't trying to do the best to be reliable. Being truly reliable means that you are communicating clearly. You are communicating what you need, where your boundaries are, with respect to what other people's boundaries are as well. Okay. And the final move is called close the loop. Right? The best way to give an example of that, right, is in everything that we do, right? We look at things like these urgency situations. We look at the communications issues. It all boils down to, at the end, are we closing the loop? Sometimes it's as simple as going back to the person and saying, I did this, it seems to have solved the problem, do you concur? Right? Getting that sign off, which we're generally pretty good at. A lot of times it gets more complicated than that, right? And I'll give you an example, right? We sometimes, especially in software development, we tend to think that code completion is all we need to get to. But code completion is not closing the loop. As tech people, we are, whether we like it or not, responsible for what I call operational closure. Okay. We build something, we do something, we fix something, right? It gets really, really bad when we don't communicate that it's been done, it's been merged, and get people involved to make sure that what we understood it to be is exactly what they needed, right? So some distinctions in this, and that was one of them. Code completion versus operational closure, right? Holding a boundary versus making an excuse. I don't want to do this, so I'm going to figure out a way to make an excuse, right? Or I'm going to delegate it to somebody else. You know, hey, we might be able to pull that off, right? But when we do that, it can, from an outside perception, hurt people's perception of our reliability, right? But a good example of delegation as a boundary is oftentimes oftentimes in code, we get approached as, oh, you were the person who worked on this project X number of months, weeks, years, however long ago. So I remember working with you, so therefore I'm bringing you this problem. Well, in the meantime, right, 4 other people have made changes to that same exact thing in various differing projects. And so it's actually a really great example of this, because that happened to me recently. I got asked a question about a particular system that I originally had a hand in building that other people have touched since then. And you could literally see the daisy chain happening from a high level authority who pulls in the next high level authority, who pulls into that same conversation me, right? All agreeing and saying the same thing, but going to the next person and saying, but I'm going to pull this person in for their input to be sure, right? What I watched 3 people taking responsibility for helping answer the business's question, right? And trying to get down to an authority. In this particular case, I could answer it, and then I pushed it back up the chain to go, for this last piece, this person knows. Delegating isn't about getting rid of the responsibility for helping and answering the question or being involved. Delegating is about making sure the right person who can help most gets to be able to give the answer to what is needed, right? Without clear boundary being set up to say, hey, I'm involved here. I'm going to stay involved until I'm sure you're being helped. That is more of an excuse. That's more of a delegation and getting out of it than it is a reliable way of making sure that things get done. But we also deal with things like what is really urgent and what is urgency theater, right? Which the simple question I said about the simple question I posed of making people answer questions, is this really urgent or is it more important, right? Making them answer the question is often a great way to get them to rethink their own potential panic and hold their own boundaries. Okay. So what I'd like to do for this last bit, right, today, is kind of open up the floor to y'all and ask the question of what in what we talked about today, does it does it strike you as different from what you normally do? Or is this, do you guys feel like you learned something new today in this, or is it just stuff that you know and need reminders of? Or you knew and you didn't need a reminder of? What are your guys' thoughts on the notes and the process that I've given you here today?
I would say that whenever someone approaches you with something, I knew that I should push back with some questions, but I'm glad that you provided some specifics that are professional, but get down to the answers that you need, especially the asking about the critical urgency, importance, and otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about these things, just on day-to-day basis since we work together. But like, I think these are things I'll say that these are things that I'm learning and attempting to continue to put into practice. So definitely was worse at these things even, 6 months ago. But have made progress since. Still, occasionally slip ups happen. That's to be expected. But it's something that I'm actively working on trying to implement more often in my day-to-day work. Some days are better than others. Sometimes depending on workload and stress levels and everything, sometimes those can erode faster than others. But yeah, overall, just working to implement some of these in my own day-to-day life.
Yeah, for me, I feel it was both. I feel like I both need a reminder and I did get some new bits out of this. I had to sort of pivot pretty quickly because in my career, I did a little bit of an abnormal one. I did a startup pretty shortly after I did my junior stuff. So I was a lot of imposter syndrome. And I think the biggest issue I actually had the whole time was communication because we were a small enough team to where we don't need to like traditional Jira tickets. I did end up doing that just for like defects, but my biggest issue was always the work-life balance thing. I know for me, I know, I have a vested interest in the company's success or failure. So I was willing to put in those insane hours. Like 4 hours of sleep every day for 2 months, 3 months. You should have seen the code I've written during that time period. That was awful. Like, because I was cutting into my sleep time to get the code done because I had management tasks. And it's also a different culture I was working with. We had international teams, so very different work culture, very different work-life balance, and I guess I did decently because a lot of people were actually very happy because if I saw someone working around midnight or 1 a.m., I said, "Hey, what are you doing? Go to sleep." I noticed it. It's fine. You guys are doing great. Do not be up this late unless you're like, and I said, hey, don't be in for the morning stand-up or anything because they don't have as much of a vested interest as I do in that. So I was trying to help them set their boundaries. Very different, aspect, very different angle, but I wanted to try to make the work culture I wanted to work in, which was, I guess I did decent on it, but financials and other things did change things. So every now and then I do wonder, like, if I was an absolute jerk as a boss, would I, would the company still be around? And I'm like, if it was, I wouldn't want to be in it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. DJ, you had mentioned in our original questions, like that, like the urgency and panic is kind of what sets in for you, right? How do you, knowing that you've been sort of practicing some of this too, right? How do you see these steps that I've communicated practically helping you to hold that boundary in the future?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely noticed a decrease in just overall stress levels. If I'm not interpreting everything as a fire, hey, what do you know? Things aren't as stressful. But Yeah, and I mean, there's still steps, that I need to take to, sets, and enforce those boundaries a bit more. But I've seen a marked improvement. Um, and then my mind went blank, so I probably only answered half your question. But
No, that's perfect. That's great. No, hey, you're taking steps, right? You've implemented some of this, right? And you need to continue like setting further boundaries, communicating those things out to people, and that's for yourself, right? Like, remember, our boundaries are set for ourselves. They're not. We don't set boundaries for other people, right? There's stuff that we do, right? Or we don't do. Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, I really want to chime in on. I wanted to chime in on that one because I actually feel like a lot of the issues I faced in my, my work experience has been, and now that I can see from the business side, the issue is someone did not set a boundary on their end, and they are trying to do their best to honor something that they did not respect their boundaries on, so yours will get pushed. So I feel like sometimes for me, that's kind of helpful because it's like, it's not that you're necessarily doing anything wrong, it's that someone did not set a boundary and they need to fix it ASAP because they did not set a boundary. So it kind of goes down the chain. I don't know if that helps you personally, but for me, it helped a lot to sort of, realize that.
that's
Right.
definitely something that I had not considered. Sorry, I don't mean to
No.
step, but yeah, that's not something I've ever really thought of before, and that I like that point. So, thank you.
And I was going to ask you, Brennan, like a very similar question. You had mentioned that, like for you, speed is one of the major things that you sacrifice when those things hit, that boundary collapses, right? So you have a speed at which you work, right?
Yes.
And when that hits, like because you also have a quality boundary, being a quality person,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
You don't want the quality boundary to be affected. So now you've got this sort of weird relationship between speed and quality, right?
Yeah.
Which
Absolutely.
how do you think that the idea of communicating those boundaries, the whole three-step process, preserving the boundary, communicating the constraints, and closing the loop, how do you think that might help you with difficulties you're seeing today in the work that you do?
Okay. Yeah. So first, I actually have been able to retroactively look at some of my work while I was under stress, and I can tell there's like a curve where I'm going up because I'm like trying to rush to hit everything, and then I realize the quality might not be there. I catch it just before, and then my speed dips hard. So that's sort of when I realize, okay, I need to slow down or I'm going to compromise quality. So for me, that has been sort of something I'm trying to catch myself as I'm going onto the on ramp, essentially. Um, so I'm trying to get myself before I hit that because I know I will work an hour or two late. I will, and it'll just kind of snowball and take an inch, give a mile kind of thing. So I'm trying to be very cognizant and aware of that, which has been sort of my first thing. And I'll be like, hey, I cannot finish this today. Um, that's kind of what I have to do at the end of the day. I have to, at some point, I have to be firm and say that, which I think we've already touched on, how much that impacts your perceived reliability. But it's kind of a question of if I can't cut anything else off, because I would like to get everything important done by the end of the day, of course. But if I can't, then I'm going to sacrifice the, ability. Sometimes I can say, hey, I'll get this in the morning when I'm fresh. I don't think I'll have quite the, this won't be quite as good if I'm doing it right now. And sometimes that helps. Sometimes it doesn't. Again, sometimes we don't communicate it the best, but generally speaking, I feel like that's a better approach to take. I feel like, hey, I could finish this today, but if I do, I'm not sure about the quality of it. And the QA guy saying quality kind of makes people sometimes stop and think and, you know, makes them think of a boundary or sort of reset, which has been helpful for me.
Yep. And Tabitha, you said that you tend to sacrifice that capacity, resulting in longer working days for you and things like that. So, how might these steps help you in in preserving that boundary and still and in getting to be known as more reliable. Though, I mean, truthfully, I already know you was pretty reliable anyway. So, but how do these steps help you, if at all?
I definitely help. I think kind of what Brandon mentioned, like acknowledging that, yes, I can stay up late and get this done, but the quality is likely going to suffer. I'm an elder millennial too, and my brain does not really function in a technological sense past about 10 p.m. So I've learned that it's time to cut it off and start fresh the next day. So acknowledging that the quality suffers, I hope can help me to preserve my boundary of capacity.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're getting close to time, and I really appreciate y'all's feedback. I want to just remind us that, like, the goal isn't to remove urgency here in those situations, right? We're looking at what does it mean to be reliable? What does it really mean to be reliable? And the truth of the matter is, boundaries are sometimes competing. We know that, right? Our work concerns, we have competing priorities always, right? And boundaries, like priorities, they sometimes compete with each other. The trick here is being reliable starts with being aware of those competitions, being aware of which one's going to affect me the most, what's going to be impacted, communicating that, and making sure that if we have absolutely rigid boundaries around certain things, that those are sacrificed last, right? Being more aware of ourselves and our work is always the goal. So next session, 2 weeks from today, we'll focus on something that's somewhat related to this, right? What I call escalation integrity, the difference between being clear and escalation theater. We all know that people sometimes escalate. I might start playing with fun titles for these sessions, and the session for this title maybe, can I see your manager? This people escalate for theater often, right? So we're going to talk about what that really looks like in a professional environment, what our behaviors can look like. And again, I think all of you may have had the link to schedule a chat with me anytime. You guys are more welcome to do that. And if you have any further questions on this, please feel free to reach out at any given time. Again, I appreciate y'all's attendance, and it is now my lunchtime, so I'm going to go do that. And again, thank you all very much. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.